The rope bit into her ankles like wire. Her scrubs, still stained with another patient's blood from her last shift, hung loose around her shoulders as the world above her became the floor, and the floor became the sky. Reyes crouched down until his face was level with hers, his voice so calm it was worse than screaming. "You thought we wouldn't find out," he said, almost gently. "Little nurse, little spy." Ava Martinez did not blink. Her heart was slamming against her ribs at 160 beats per minute, and she knew that because she was a nurse, and nurses count things. But she did not blink. If you want to know how a 31-year-old woman ended up hanging upside down in a cartel warehouse, and how 20 Navy SEALs turned that night completely inside out, then stay right here. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. There is a particular kind of invisible that some people wear like a second skin. Not the invisibility of being shy or awkward or forgettable in the way that most of us occasionally are. This is a cultivated, deliberate, almost surgical invisibility. The kind that takes years to learn and even longer to trust. Ava Martinez had been wearing hers for so long that some mornings she caught herself in the bathroom mirror at 5:45 a.m., staring at her own face and wondering if the reflection was someone she actually knew. She had been at Mercy General Hospital in San Diego for 6 months. Ward 4B, cardiothoracic step-down. She had been assigned there deliberately. The unit sat on the 4th floor of the hospital's east wing, directly above a supply corridor that the DEA's Coastal Narcotics Task Force had been watching for 11 months. But to everyone on that ward, she was just Ava. Quiet Ava. Competent Ava. The nurse who always showed up 15 minutes early, who never complained about a double shift, who brought store-bought cookies to the break room on Tuesdays for no particular reason, who remembered every single patient's name and their spouse's name and the name of the dog they missed back home. Nobody noticed her noticing things. That was the point. "You take report on bed 7? Asked Dana Kowalski, the charge nurse, sliding a tablet across the nurse's station counter on what would eventually become one of the last ordinary mornings Ava spent inside that building. Dana was 52, sharp as broken glass, and had worked cardiac step-down for 20 years. She had a gift for reading people that Ava respected enormously and worked around with equal care. "Took it at 6:55, Ava said, clicking her pen against her palm. 68-year-old male, post-CABG day 3, SATs hovering around 94, intermittent runs of AFib that cardiology is calling benign, but I'm watching. His wife is coming in at noon and she's going to ask questions." Dana raised an eyebrow. "You already looked up the wife?" "Her name is Gloria. She was a school principal for 30 years. She is not going to accept 'the doctor says it's fine' as an answer." Dana laughed, a short, real laugh. "Lord, you're good at this." "I just pay attention," Ava said, and she smiled the way she had learned to smile, warmly and not too much. What she did not tell Dana was that 40 minutes earlier, before the 6 a.m. shift change, she had used her access badge to step into the supply corridor on the 3rd floor. What she did not tell Dana was that she had taken 11 photographs on a secondary phone, encrypted, auto-deleting, the kind that the DEA tech team had built specifically for this operation. What she did not tell Dana was that in the 3rd bay of that corridor, behind a pallet of saline bags and underneath a false bottom in a red biohazard cart, she had counted enough bundled cash to make her chest go tight. New bills, rubber-banded in stacks of 10,000. She had not touched a single one. She had just photographed them and walked back up the stairs. The phone was already empty by the time she reached Ward 4B. The photographs were already on a secure server 3 miles away, inside a federal building that did not appear in any public directory. This was what Ava did. She paid attention. Her real name was Ava Martinez. That part was true. The rest of her biography, the version that existed in the hospital's HR system, in the California Board of Registered Nursing database, in the lease for her apartment in Hillcrest, was approximately 60% accurate. She had grown up in Fresno. She had gone to nursing school. She had worked 2 years in a Sacramento ICU. All of that was real. What the HR file did not mention was the 4 years she had spent before nursing school. What it did not mention was the 18 months of intelligence training at a facility that her security clearance did not allow her to name in casual conversation. What it did not mention was the man who had recruited her, a soft-spoken Defense Intelligence Agency handler named Garrett Cole, who had sat across from her at a diner in Sacramento and slid a manila folder across the table like it was a dinner menu and said, "You have an unusual set of skills, Ms. Martinez. We have an unusual kind of job." She had taken the folder home. She had read it twice. She had called her mother and told her she was thinking about a career change. Her mother had been relieved. Her mother had always worried about her working nights in the ICU. Her mother still did not know exactly what the career change had involved. Now, 6 months into the Mercy General operation, Ava existed in 2 parallel worlds simultaneously. In one world, she was the nurse. She started IVs on the first stick. She held the hands of men and women who were frightened in the specific, raw, 3 in the morning way that only hospital patients know. She talked Dr. Caldwell, her attending, through 2 code situations in which his voice had gone tight with panic and hers had stayed absolutely level. In that world, she was good at her job, genuinely, deeply good at it, in a way that had surprised even her, because the caring had turned out to be real. She had not expected that. She had expected to feel like an actor. Instead, she felt like a nurse who was also sometimes something else. In the second world, she was feeding intelligence to a joint DEA-DIA task force that had been building a case for nearly 2 years against a man named Ernesto Reyes. She had not met Reyes personally, not yet, but she knew him the way a cardiologist knows a patient from an echo. She had studied his rhythms, his patterns, his habits, the specific geometry of how he moved money and men and influence through a hospital that had no idea it was being used. The cartel had been exploiting Mercy General for 18 months before the task force identified the corridor route. Cash moved in through the loading dock during supply deliveries, migrated through the subterranean corridor network, and exited via a medical waste contractor who was very handsomely compensated for his flexibility. Patients who were, in fact, cartel members convalesced on Ward 4B, where the regular rotation of nursing staff made it easy for associates to visit without attracting attention. It was elegant as criminal logistics went. Ava had admitted that to Garrett Cole during one of their check-ins because she valued accuracy over comfort. Elegant, Cole had repeated, his voice dry over the encrypted line. "I'm not complimenting them," she said. "I'm assessing them. There's a difference." "Right. What's your assessment of the patient in bed 12? Bed 12 was a 44-year-old man named Jorge Medina, admitted for a kidney stone. His chart was unremarkable. His visitors were not. In 4 days, 11 different men had come to see Jorge Medina, staying an average of 4 minutes each. None of them related to him. None of them signing in as required. "He's a relay," Ava said. "They're using his room to pass information. Probably physical. Slips in the flowers, maybe the food. Low tech. Smart. Can you get closer?" "I'm his nurse," she said. "I'm already as close as it gets." She had been methodical about building her position. She had made herself indispensable on the unit without ever being flashy about it. She had made friends carefully, strategically, in a way that felt natural and was anything but. The only person she had come close to actually liking, the way she used to like people before she learned to be careful, was Marcus Webb, a travel nurse from Atlanta who had been assigned to 4B for a 13-week contract. Marcus was 34 years old, funny in the specific way that nurses are funny, dark, compressed, efficient. He had a photograph of his daughter on his badge clip. Her name was Imani, and she was 7. And she had apparently refused to eat anything that was not yellow for the past 3 months, which Marcus described with the helpless bewilderment of a man who loved his child completely and understood her not at all. Corn, bananas, mac and cheese, and scrambled eggs, he said one night at the nurse's station, eating a granola bar at 2 a.m. while they waited for labs on a post-op. That's the entire food pyramid, according to Imani. Is she healthy? Ava asked. Thriving. It's infuriating. She had laughed. A real laugh, not a managed one. And then she had felt the small, familiar flicker of something she could not afford, and she had put it away, neatly, the way she put everything away. Marcus noticed her in a way that most people didn't, and that was the problem. He noticed the way she sometimes paused before answering questions, not from uncertainty, but from something that looked like calculation. He noticed that she never talked about her life outside the hospital in any detail that could be verified. He noticed that she was the only nurse he had ever met who, when a patient crashed, seemed to go not just calm, but almost, he couldn't quite find the word for it, operational. Like a switch flipped somewhere behind her eyes. He had mentioned it once, carefully, the way you mention something to someone you don't want to offend. You ever do anything before nursing? He asked. What kind of anything? I don't know. Military, maybe. The way you run a code, it's different. She had tilted her head and smiled. My dad was a firefighter. I grew up in emergency mode. He had nodded. He had let it go. But she noticed that he filed it, the way perceptive people file things that don't quite add up. She would think about that later, after everything. She would wonder what he had seen in her that she hadn't known was visible. The day things started to crack was a Tuesday. Ava remembered it clearly, not because anything outwardly dramatic happened, quite the opposite. It was an ordinary Tuesday, gray and cool, with a marine layer sitting on the city like a held breath. She had come in at 6, taken report, done her morning assessments, argued pleasantly with a hospitalist about a potassium replacement order for bed 9, eaten half a yogurt at 11 standing at the medication cart, and at 2:15 in the afternoon, had walked down to the 3rd floor corridor to check a drop point. The drop point was a specific floor drain cover that had been modified by a DIA technical team 3 weeks into the operation. Behind the cover was a slim magnetic recess that could hold a drive no bigger than a thumbnail. Ava used it twice a week to deposit compiled intelligence, notes on visitor patterns, overheard fragments, anything that couldn't go through the secondary phone because the volume was too high. On this Tuesday, she reached the drain, crouched, and pulled the cover. The recess was empty. That was normal. She reached into her scrub pocket for the drive. And then she heard footsteps. Not the footsteps of a housekeeper or a supply tech. She knew those rhythms. This was a measured, deliberate walk. The walk of someone who was not going anywhere in particular because they were already where they needed to be. She had the cover back in place and was standing upright, checking a clipboard she had brought specifically for this purpose, before the footsteps rounded the corner. The man who appeared was someone she had not seen in this corridor before. Mid-40s, broad, a gray polo shirt and khaki pants that said contractor or facilities, but his hands said otherwise. The kind of hands that had done specific work, the kind of work that left a particular stillness in the way a man holds himself. He looked at her clipboard. He looked at her badge. He looked at her face. You're on 4, he said, not a question. Supply check, she said, holding up the clipboard. Saline inventory's been off. I like to come down myself, so I'm not arguing with a number on a screen. The pause lasted 2 seconds. She counted. Right, he said and walked past her. She completed her check. She walked back up the stairs at a pace that suggested she had all the time in the world. She got to the 3rd step before her pulse hit 150, and she made herself breathe through her nose. 3 counts in, 5 counts out, until it came back down. She had been seen. maybe. Or she had been a nurse doing a supply check, which is exactly what she had looked like. She didn't know, and not knowing was its own specific variety of frightening. That night she called Cole on the encrypted line. She told him about the man in the corridor. She described his build, his hands, his eyes, the gray, flat, particular quality of them. Cole was quiet for longer than she liked. "We'll run the description," he said. "You want me to back off the drop point?" "Not yet. Changing the routine now could signal more than the risk. Sit tight." Sit tight. She had heard that phrase from Cole 14 times in 6 months, and every single time it landed like a small stone dropped in still water. Small, but with rings that spread and spread. "Cole," she said, "what's the status on the timeline?" Another pause. "We're close." "That's not a number." "No," he agreed. "It's not. I need 2 more weeks, Ava. Maybe 3. She thought about the man with the gray eyes, and the contractor's clothes, and the specific way he had said, "You're on 4. She thought about Jorge Medina's 11 visitors. She thought about the stacks of cash in the biohazard cart, and the way the number of stacks had changed between her first count and her second, which meant the operation was scaling, not contracting, which meant they were running towards something, not away from it. 2 weeks, she said. "I'll give you 2 weeks." She would later reflect, not bitterly, but with the clear-eyed precision she applied to most things, that she had been off by 11 days. The break came faster than anyone had projected, because the piece that broke it was human, and human beings are the variable that no timeline survives. The piece was a mid-level cartel associate named Dante Cruz, who had been skimming, a small but regular skim, the kind that gets noticed not immediately but eventually, and who, when he realized he was about to be noticed, made the calculation that a deal with the DEA was preferable to a conversation with Reyes. Dante Cruz sat across a table from 2 federal agents and told them everything he knew, which turned out to be considerably more than the task force had expected, including something that made Garrett Cole's blood pressure spike in a way he did not describe to Ava until afterward. Dante Cruz told them that Ernesto Reyes had been told, not suspected, told, by someone with access to partial task force information, that there was a source inside Mercy General Hospital. Female. Medical staff. That was all he knew. Female. Medical staff. No name, no unit, no physical description beyond that. But in a hospital with 400 nurses, that was already a radius. And Reyes, who had survived 20 years in an industry where survival required the ability to narrow radii quickly, was already measuring. Cole called Ava at 6:17 in the morning, 2 days after the Cruz interview. "How fast can you get out?" he asked. No preamble. She was in her car in the hospital parking structure. She had been about to go in for her shift. She sat very still. "What happened?" "We have a leak somewhere. Not your end, ours. Someone upstream. The target knows there's a source in the hospital. He doesn't have your name yet." "Yet," she repeated. "We're moving the timeline. I need you to finish your shift today, act completely normal, and I'll have exfil details to you by 1400. She looked at the hospital entrance, the automatic doors, the morning shift nurses filtering in with their coffee cups and their badge clips. She thought about Marcus Webb and his yellow food daughter. She thought about Gloria, who was a retired school principal and who deserved a real answer about her husband's AFib. "My patience, Ava." "I know," she said. "I know." She went in for her shift. She acted completely normal, which was both the hardest and easiest thing she had done in 6 months, because her entire life at Mercy General had been an act of complete normalcy, and she had become very, very good at it. She checked on bed 7. His SATs were up to 96. She called Gloria and told her to bring her questions because the answers were going to be real ones. She stood at the nurse's station at noon and ate a sandwich and argued with Marcus about whether the hospital's new documentation system was an improvement or a bureaucratic punishment. And she laughed at the right moments and made the right faces and felt, underneath all of it, the very specific sensation of something beginning to end. At 1:58, her pager went off. The number was internal, an extension she did not recognize. She stepped into the stairwell to call it back. No one answered. At 2:03, she tried Cole's line. It rang 6 times and went to the dead drop voicemail. At 2:11, she was standing at the medication cart when she felt, rather than heard, the change in the air behind her. A shift in pressure, a new weight in the hallway, and she turned around. The man from the 3rd-floor corridor was standing 20 feet away at the entrance to Ward 4B. He was not wearing contractor clothes now. He was wearing scrubs, patient transport scrubs, the kind that anyone could obtain, the kind that made you invisible in a hospital the same way her nurse's badge made her invisible. He was looking at her with those gray, flat eyes, and he was not alone. The man did not move immediately. That was the thing that told Ava everything she needed to know about him. Amateurs moved fast, because fast felt like control. This man stood at the entrance to Ward 4B and simply waited, the way a door waits, the way a wall waits, patient and absolute. His partner, because she clocked the second one in her peripheral vision 3 seconds after the first, standing near the elevator bank with his arms loose at his sides, was younger, thinner, with a specific kind of restless energy that said he was new to this and trying very hard not to look like it. 2 of them, on her unit, in the middle of a Thursday afternoon. Ava set the medication cup down on the cart with a steadiness that surprised even her. "You're going to walk to the elevator," she said quietly to herself, as though coaching a patient through a difficult breath. "You're going to walk to the elevator, and you're going to look like a nurse who is going to pharmacy." She did exactly that. She picked up a blank requisition form from the counter, something to hold, something that said purpose, and she walked toward the elevator. Not fast, not slow. The rhythm of a woman who had somewhere to be but was not running from anything. She pressed the button. She waited. She felt the gray-eyed man's attention on the back of her neck, like a hand that hadn't touched her yet. The elevator opened. She stepped in. The doors closed. She did not exhale until the 2nd floor. She did not go to pharmacy. She went to the stairwell at the south end of the building, and she called Cole's number again. And this time, on the 4th ring, he picked up. "They're here," she said. "2 of them. 4th floor." The silence on Cole's end lasted exactly 1 second too long, and in that second she understood that he already knew something she didn't. "Ava, listen to me carefully. Do not go back to your unit. My patience. Do not go back to your unit. Walk out the south entrance. There is a gray Chevy Tahoe parked in the 2nd row of the surface lot. The driver's name is Hendricks. He knows your face." She was already moving down the stairs, the requisition form still in her hand, which she would later find in her jacket pocket and not remember putting there. "Cole, how long have you known they were here?" 20 minutes. She stopped on the landing between the 2nd floor and the 1st. 20 minutes. "We were positioning 20 minutes, she said again, and her voice came out very quiet and very even, which was, she had learned, what happened to her voice when she was most frightened and most furious simultaneously. "While I was up there on that unit, standing 6 feet from those men, I know." "Don't say I know. Tell me what changed." Cole took a breath. "Dante Cruz recanted this morning. Partial recant. He says he gave us wrong information about the timeline. Reyes wasn't supposed to move for another 3 weeks. Something accelerated him. We don't know what yet." "Something accelerated him," she repeated, starting to move again, taking the stairs at a controlled speed, not running. "You want to speculate about what that might be?" "Ava, because I'm going to speculate that the leak you mentioned this morning accelerated him. I'm going to speculate that whoever told Reyes there was a female source in the hospital also told him something specific enough that he felt comfortable sending 2 men to my unit at 2 in the afternoon. In scrubs." Another pause. She hit the 1st floor landing and pushed through to the main corridor, walking steady, badge visible, face neutral. "Get to the Tahoe," Cole said. She got to the Tahoe. Hendricks was exactly what Cole had not told her to expect. 40, former military in the specific way that never fully leaves the body, a jaw that looked like it had been argued with many times and had always won. He pulled out of the lot before she had fully closed the door. "We're going to the staging location," he said. 40-minute drive. "I need a phone that works." He handed her one without looking at her. She called Cole again. "They saw me," she said. "The man from the corridor. He made eye contact for 4 seconds. That's enough." "We don't know that he confirmed your identity." "He was on my unit, Cole, in transport scrubs. He was there for one reason." "We are monitoring Reyes's communications." "Are you monitoring them in real time? Or are you monitoring them on a 3-hour delay, the way you were monitoring the corridor last week?" She heard the sharpness in her own voice, and she did not apologize for it. "Because the difference between those two things is currently the difference between whether I sleep in a safe house tonight or whether I become a loose end." Cole did not answer that directly, which was its own answer. "Get to the staging location," he said. "We'll reassess." Hendricks drove. Ava sat in the passenger seat and did the things she did when she needed to think. She went very still, the way a pond goes still, and she let everything rise to the surface. She thought about the gray-eyed man and the 4 seconds of eye contact. She thought about whether 4 seconds was enough. She thought about the specific geometry of what Reyes knew. Female, medical staff. She thought about the 11 visitors to Jorge Medina's room, and whether any of them had been watching her without her knowing, filing her face the same way she had filed theirs. She was good at this. She had been trained by people who were exceptional at this. But she was also one person, operating undercover, in a building full of people with competing attentions. And she had been there 6 months, and 6 months was a long time. "You've done this before," Hendricks said. It wasn't a question. "Does it matter?" she said. "Not to the job, just, you're not doing the thing most people do." "What thing?" "Falling apart," he said simply. She looked out the window. "Falling apart comes later," she said. "Usually around 3 in the morning, when nothing needs to be held together anymore." He nodded like that made complete sense, and she thought he was probably a person who knew exactly what 3 in the morning felt like, when you finally let everything down. The staging location was a converted industrial unit 12 miles east of the hospital. Inside, it looked like a controlled explosion of equipment: laptops, monitors, whiteboards, folding tables pushed together. 4 people she didn't recognize. Cole, standing at the center of it with a coffee cup and the look of a man who had not slept and was not planning to. "Tell me where we are," she said before he could say anything. Cole put the cup down. "Reyes has gone quiet. Communications dropped about 90 minutes ago, which either means he's spooked or he's moving and he doesn't want to be heard." "Moving where?" "We don't know yet." "Do you have eyes on him?" "We had eyes on him until 11 a.m. He left his primary location in a vehicle we were tracking. The vehicle went to a parking structure in Chula Vista and has not moved since. He either switched cars or he's still in the building." "He switched cars," Ava said. "Probably. Then you don't have eyes on him." "No," Cole admitted. "We don't currently have eyes on him." The room absorbed that. Ava stood in the middle of it and felt the specific, cold clarity of a situation that had passed the point where careful management was an option. Plans had edges, and they were past the edges of this one. "What about the federal agent?" she asked. The room shifted. Cole's jaw tightened a fraction of a degree. "Still in play." The federal agent was the piece of the operation that Ava was not supposed to know about and had figured out anyway, because she paid attention and because the task force was not quite as airtight as it believed itself to be. His name was Daniel Reyes, no relation, a DEA senior agent who had been working embedded inside the cartel's financial operation for 14 months and had 3 weeks ago gone silent. The task force's official position was that he had gone dark voluntarily. Ava's assessment was that he had been made and was being held, and she had told Cole this opinion twice, and Cole had said the official position stood. The official position, she said now, has a name and a family and a 3-week absence that nobody is calling what it is. Ava, if Reyes is moving, he's not moving to disappear. He's moving to consolidate, which means he's going somewhere he controls. And if Daniel Reyes is being held, that's where he's being held. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the other people in the room with the look of someone who has been told something by 3 different people and is only now allowing himself to believe it. "We have a probable location," he said quietly. "A warehouse in National City. We've had it under passive surveillance for 6 days. There's been activity consistent with a holding situation." 6 days, Ava said. "The decision to move required..." 6 days, she said again. "He's been there 6 days. Cole met her eyes and said nothing, and the nothing was a kind of answer. She turned away from him and walked to the far end of the table where a laptop was open to a satellite image she wasn't supposed to be looking at. She looked at it anyway. The warehouse was a rectangular building on a dead-end industrial street, loading access on one end, a single personnel door on the other, no windows on the ground level. She studied it for 45 seconds, which was enough. "How many inside?" she asked without turning around. "Estimated 6 to 10. Weapons?" "Assumed heavy. SEAL team on standby?" This time the pause was different, shorter, tighter. "There's a unit at Coronado that has been briefed." She turned around. "Briefed means ready." "Briefed means briefed," Cole said carefully. "Authorization to deploy requires..." "Cole." She said his name the way you say a name when you are done with everything around it. "What is it going to take?" He put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them. He looked up at her. And in that moment, she saw something shift in him. Not weakness, but the particular thing that happens to a person when they stop managing a situation and start being honest about it. "We need Reyes at that location," he said. "Confirmed presence. If he's there, if the agent is there, I can have authorization in under an hour. And you need someone to confirm it. I need eyes inside or immediately proximate. Everything we have is passive. It's not enough." She knew what he was asking before he finished asking it. She knew it the way you know a diagnosis before the test results come back. Because all the symptoms have been pointing at it for a long time, and you have simply been choosing not to name it. "You want me to go to the warehouse?" she said. "I want you to make that decision," Cole said quietly. "I am not ordering you. I want to be very clear about that. What you have already done for this operation, what you have already given, is more than..." "Stop," she said. "Don't finish that sentence." He stopped. She walked to the window. She thought about Daniel Reyes, a man she had never met, who had spent 6 days in a warehouse in National City because a system of careful, managed decisions had moved too slowly and too carefully to get him out. She thought about Ernesto Reyes, who had 20 years of survival built on his ability to read situations faster than the people trying to manage them. She thought about the gray-eyed man on Ward 4B and the 4 seconds of eye contact. She thought about the fact that her cover was probably already burned, that the careful, invisible life she had constructed on 4B, the store-bought cookies, the 6 a.m. report, Gloria and her school principal's questions, was over regardless of what she decided now. There was no going back to that. The question was only what direction forward looked like. She turned around. "I need a vehicle that isn't this one," she said. "I need the floor plan if you have it. I need a comm unit that isn't using the same frequency as the one they jammed at the hospital. And I need you to have the authorization process started before I get there, not after I confirm. Before." Cole was already moving. "One more thing," she said. He looked at her. "Marcus Webb, travel nurse on 4B. He's not part of any of this. If Reyes's people go back to that hospital looking for leverage, Marcus and the rest of that unit need to be moved. I'll make the call. Make it now, she said, while I'm watching. Cole picked up his phone and made the call while she watched. She listened to him give the instruction. Protective detail, 4B staff, non-negotiable. And when he hung up, she gave him a single nod. 20 minutes later, she was in a different vehicle, alone, driving toward National City with a floor plan on the seat beside her that she had already memorized. A comm unit in her left ear that was running on a frequency 3 bands away from standard task force channels, and a secondary phone taped to the inside of her right forearm under her sleeve. She was still wearing her scrubs. She had not had time to change and had decided it did not matter. Scrubs were another kind of invisible, the same way a nurse's badge was invisible. People saw the uniform before they saw the person. She thought about that as she drove. She thought about all the months she had spent being invisible, and how carefully she had built it, and how quickly it had come apart. Not because she had made a mistake, but because the system around her had a leak that had nothing to do with her. That was the thing about undercover work that nobody told you before you started. You could do everything right. You could be careful and precise and disciplined and completely right. And the variable that undid you was always human, and it was always somewhere you couldn't see. She parked 2 blocks from the warehouse on a side street between a body shop and a plumbing supplier, both closed for the evening. She sat in the car for 90 seconds and ran through the floor plan one more time. Entry points, probable guard positions, the specific location of the interior office that appeared on satellite as a heat signature separate from the main floor. Separate heat signature, a room within the room. The kind of arrangement you created when you needed something contained. Someone was in that office. She touched the comm unit with 2 fingers. I'm on site, she said quietly. Cole's voice came back immediately. Copy. We are. Authorization is in process. We need confirmation of Reyes. Understood. Ava, you are not. I want to be very explicit. You are not to make entry. Proximate confirmation only. Copy, she said. She got out of the car. She walked toward the warehouse, and she was 40 feet from the personnel door, close enough to hear the voices inside, close enough to see the light at the bottom of the doorframe. When the door opened from the inside, and the gray-eyed man from Ward 4B filled the frame, and looked directly at her, and said one word into a radio. She ran. She made it 11 steps. The van came from her left, engine already running, no headlights. And she had time to think that was smart. That was how she would have done it, before it was on her. And the side door was open, and there were hands, 2 sets of them, pulling her off the ground with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. She fought. Of course she fought. She was trained to fight. And she fought hard, and she fought smart, targeting joints and pressure points with the precise economy of someone who understood that fighting was not about strength. It was about disruption, and she disrupted 2 of them before the third got an arm across her throat and the world tilted. Not dark, she didn't go out. She stayed conscious deliberately because conscious was the only thing she had. The van door closed. The comm unit was ripped from her ear. She counted the turns, left, right, right, straight for what she estimated as 40 seconds. Left. The van slowed. Stopped. The door opened onto concrete and fluorescent light and the specific ambient temperature of a building that had been industrial for a long time. The gray-eyed man was already there. He had beaten the van by another route. He looked at her without particular emotion, which was in its own way the most frightening thing about him. He'll want to talk to her himself, he said to someone behind her. And from deeper inside the warehouse, from the direction of the heat signature, from the room within the room, a door opened, and Ernesto Reyes walked out. He was smaller than she had expected. Medium height, medium build, a gray dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark slacks, The hands of a man who had stopped doing physical work himself decades ago, but had never forgotten how. He walked toward her with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly tilted, the posture of a man who is genuinely curious about something. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face for a long time. "I know you," he said, not accusatory, thoughtful. "You don't," she said. "Not yet," he agreed, "but I'm going to." He said something in Spanish to the men behind her, and she understood every word of it. She spoke Spanish fluently, another thing her HR file didn't mention. And what he said was, "Hang her up. I want her uncomfortable when we talk." She filed that information with the cold, terrible efficiency she had learned to apply to information she could not use yet. The rope went around her ankles. The world flipped, and Ernesto Reyes crouched down and gripped her jaw in both hands and said, almost gently, almost kindly, "Scream. Nobody's coming." She looked at him from upside down, blood beginning to press behind her eyes, and she did the calculation she had already done in the car 2 blocks away. 60 seconds to reach Cole before the comm unit went down. "Authorization in process," he had said. The SEAL team at Coronado, 40-minute staging window if the authorization came through in the next 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes, maybe 12. She just needed to survive them. "You're going to want to ask me questions," she said, her voice entirely steady despite the blood rushing to her skull. "So ask them." Reyes smiled. It was the smile of a man who appreciates competence even in his enemies. "I have one question," he said. "Who else knows about my operation?" She held his gaze from upside down, and she thought about Daniel Reyes in the room behind that door. And she thought about 20 Navy SEALs at Coronado, and she said the only thing that was both true and bought her time. "More people than you can handle," she said, "and they already know where I am." Reyes smiled at her answer the way a chess player smiles when the other side makes a move they anticipated 3 turns ago. He straightened up, took his hands out of his pockets, and walked a slow circle beneath where she hung, his footsteps deliberate on the concrete, each one landing like a period at the end of a sentence she hadn't finished yet. "More people than I can handle," he repeated, tasting the words. "That is either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which." "Take your time," Ava said. The blood pressure in her skull was building steadily. She could feel it behind her eyes, at her temples, in the specific tight throb at the base of her throat. She had been hanging for approximately 90 seconds. She knew from training that the human body could tolerate inversion for several minutes before cognitive impairment began. She had roughly 8 to 10 minutes before the pressure started affecting her judgment. She filed that number alongside everything else she was tracking and kept her face neutral. "You speak well for someone in your position," Reyes said. "I'm a nurse," she said. "We talk to people who are frightened and in pain all day. It gets easier." He stopped walking. He looked at her with something that was not quite respect and not quite amusement, but lived in the specific neighborhood between them. "You're not frightened." "I didn't say that." "You're not acting frightened." "Acting frightened wouldn't help me," she said, "so I'm not doing it." He studied her for another moment. Then he turned and said something to the gray-eyed man, whose name, she would later learn, was Vargas. And Vargas moved to the far side of the warehouse and picked up something from a folding table. She tracked him in her peripheral vision without moving her head, which was getting heavier by the second, the blood pooling and pressing. It was a phone. Vargas brought Reyes a phone. Reyes held it up so she could see the screen. It was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. It was her, standing in the 3rd-floor corridor at Mercy General, crouched over the drain access point, the cover in her hand. Her stomach dropped about 3 inches. She did not let it show. 2 weeks ago, Reyes said, "My people have been patient. I like patience. It tells you things that urgency never does." He lowered the phone. "What it told me was that you are very good, professional, the kind of professional that doesn't come from nursing school." She said nothing. Saying nothing was sometimes the most information-dense response available. "So here is my question again," Reyes said, his voice dropping to something conversational, almost intimate, the way a doctor's voice drops when they are about to tell you something serious. "Who sent you? Who knows what you found? And how much time do I have before this becomes a problem I cannot contain?" 3 questions, not one. She noted that. He was rattled enough to abandon precision. "Good. I already answered," she said. "You gave me a performance," he said. "I want facts." "The facts are the same as the performance." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and said to Vargas, 30 minutes, whatever it takes." Vargas set the phone down and moved toward her. And Ava did the calculation again, fast and cold. She had been in the warehouse for approximately 4 minutes since the van pulled in. Cole had heard her say she was on site before the comm unit was pulled. If the authorization was in process, if the SEAL team at Coronado was moving, the staging window was 40 minutes from site confirmation. She had confirmed the site at approximately 7:53 p.m. It was now, by her internal clock, roughly 7:57. She had maybe 33 minutes. Vargas reached for her left arm, and she tucked her chin and twisted her core and used the momentum of her own hanging weight to send her body into a controlled rotation that made him miss the grab. It was a small move, almost nothing, but it cost him 2 seconds and his balance, and he made a sound of surprise and frustration. "Don't," said one of the men near the wall. He was laughing, but his hand was moving toward his belt. "Let her move," Reyes said sharply. "I want her thinking clearly when she answers me." Vargas stepped back. Ava let herself settle, swaying slightly, the rope biting into her ankles with a dull, spreading pain that she breathed through and catalogued and set aside. "You stop them," she said to Reyes. "I want you functional." "That means you're not done asking questions." "I'm very far from done," he agreed. "Then we have a problem," she said, "because I'm very far from answering them." He pulled a chair from somewhere behind her, she heard it scrape, and sat down in her field of vision, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man settling in for a conversation he expects to take a while. In another context, in another life, she might have found him impressive. He had the particular quality of absolute self-possession that came from decades of making decisions that other people's lives depended on, and surviving those decisions, and carrying their weight without flinching. She recognized it because she had spent years developing a version of it herself. The difference was what the weight was made of. "Let me tell you what I know," Reyes said, "and you tell me where I'm wrong." She said nothing. "You've been at the hospital 6 months. Your name is Ava Martinez. You're from Fresno, California. Your nursing license is real. Everything behind it is not." He paused. "You had a contact outside the building, someone you called on a secondary phone that you cleared after every use. You used the 3rd-floor corridor as a dead drop, which means your contact had physical access to the building at some point, which means they are either medical staff or they have credentials that pass a hospital security check." He paused again. "How am I doing?" "You're describing a lot of people," she said. "I'm describing you," he said patiently. "The question isn't whether this is accurate. The question is who gave you the assignment." 8 minutes in the warehouse. 8:21 p.m. by her internal count, which she was maintaining with the rigid discipline of someone who understands that time is the only currency she currently has. "DEA," she said. The word landed in the room and sat there. Reyes didn't move. Vargas, behind her, went very still. The men near the wall exchanged a look that she filed without looking at them directly. "DEA," Reyes repeated. "You were going to figure it out," she said. "I'm giving it to you because it doesn't change anything for you, and it buys me something." "What does it buy you?" "Your attention," she said, "because if it's DEA, that means there's a case file. And a case file means there are people who know your name on a document that exists in a federal building. And those people are already moving, with or without me." He was quiet for almost 5 seconds. She counted. "You're trying to make me feel pressure," he said. "I'm telling you facts," she said. "What you do with pressure is your business." And then she felt it before she understood it. A shift in the room's temperature. Not physical, but human. The collective tightening of 6 people who have just received information that changes the geometry of everything. Dante Cruz, the associate who had recanted. She didn't know what "found" meant in this context, and she didn't want to. Reyes stood up from the chair. He was no longer the man who had been sitting across from her with his elbows on his knees. He was someone else now, tighter, faster, moving through the space between one decision and the next with the compressed efficiency of a man who had run out of patience for careful management. "How long?" he said to the man who had come in. 20 minutes, maybe less. There's a vehicle at the east end of the street." Reyes turned and looked at Ava. The curiosity was gone. What replaced it was something cleaner and colder and considerably more dangerous. "Change of plans," he said quietly. Then to Vargas, "Get her down, we're moving." "Moving her," Vargas said. "We're not leaving her here," Reyes said. "She's the only card I have left." The rope went slack. She dropped fast and Vargas caught her, not gently, but efficiently, and her feet hit the concrete and her legs almost buckled from the sudden reversal of blood pressure. She grabbed his arm without thinking, not for the intimacy of it, but for the physics, and he let her, which surprised her. Her vision swam for 3 seconds. She breathed through it. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The room stabilized. "Walk," Vargas said. She walked. Her ankles ached where the rope had been. Her head felt too full, pressure redistributing, and she thought briefly, with a detached, clinical part of her mind that never fully went off duty, about the physiology of what had just happened to her body and what it would feel like in the morning. Then she thought about the fact that getting to morning was contingent on the next 30 minutes, and she set the clinical inventory aside. Reyes was already moving toward the rear of the warehouse. The man who had delivered the news about Dante was on a phone. 2 of the wall guards were pulling on jackets and moving with the focused, narrow urgency of people who understood that staying was no longer an option. 8 minutes. 8:30 p.m. The staging window was closing the wrong way. And then her secondary phone, the one taped to the inside of her right forearm, under her sleeve, the one Vargas had not found because he had checked her pockets and her waistband and her bra line, but not her forearms, vibrated twice. 2 vibrations. The specific pattern Cole's team used for a single message. Assets in position. She kept her face completely neutral. She kept walking. But inside, in the part of her that was counting and calculating and measuring every variable against every other variable, something clicked into alignment with a precision that felt almost physical. Assets in position meant the SEAL team was staged. It meant authorization had come through. It meant Cole had heard her confirm the site and had moved the moment the comm unit went dead. It meant that somewhere outside this building, 20 men with the specific training to end situations like this one were waiting for a signal. The signal protocol, in the absence of a functioning comm unit, was a visual. She knew this from the briefing 3 weeks ago, which she had filed in the specific part of her memory reserved for information she hoped never to need. A light source from inside the building, repeated twice, visible from the approach vector. A phone screen, a flashlight, anything. The secondary phone was a light source. The problem was that Vargas was 4 inches behind her left shoulder, and Reyes was 10 feet ahead of her, and there were 4 other armed men in her immediate vicinity, and she was walking toward an exit that would take her out of the building and into a vehicle, and away from the approach vector, and away from the signal window that was probably, by her calculation, somewhere between 3 and 6 minutes wide. She needed to stop moving forward. She needed to stop moving forward right now. She did the only thing she could do that was both true and tactically useful. She let her legs go out. Not all the way, not a collapse, nothing dramatic, nothing that read as performance. just a stumble. The specific biomechanical falter of someone whose lower extremities have been inverted for 8 minutes and whose blood pressure is still redistributing. Completely genuine, completely real, and also perfectly timed. Her left knee hit the concrete. She caught herself on both palms. She stayed down for 3 seconds, head bowed, breathing in a way that was slightly too deliberate. "Get up," Vargas said. "Give me a second," she said, and her voice was rougher than it had been, which was also real. Her throat was dry, and the pressure behind her eyes had not fully resolved, and she sounded, for the first time since they had taken her, like someone who had been through something. Reyes turned around. "She's stalling," said one of the wall guards. "She's been hanging upside down for 10 minutes, said another, in a tone that suggested he had at least a baseline understanding of physiology. Reyes walked back toward her. He crouched down the same way he had crouched in front of her in the warehouse, face level with face, patient and watchful. "Get up," he said, not unkindly. "I'm working on it," she said, and under her sleeve, against her forearm, her right thumb found the phone's power button, woke the screen to full brightness, and held it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. She shifted her position, palm pressing the concrete, and the angle of her arm changed just enough, forearm angling toward the east wall, toward the personnel door at the far end of the building, toward the approach vector that was on the east side of the street, toward the men who were staged and waiting for exactly this. She killed the screen, waited 2 seconds, lit it again. 1, 2, 3, killed it. Reyes had not taken his eyes off her face. She held his gaze with everything she had. "Stand up," he said. She stood up. Vargas put a hand on her arm and moved her forward. And she went, because she had done what she could do, and the rest was no longer hers to control. And the specific discipline of that, the act of releasing the outcome after you've done everything the situation allowed, was one of the hardest things she had ever learned. And she had never learned it perfectly, and she was not perfectly calm in this moment. She was terrified. She was terrified in the specific, full-body, irreducible way that no amount of training ever fully eliminates, because training teaches you to function through fear, not to stop having it. Her hands were steady, her voice was level, her face was neutral, and under all of it she was 31 years old, and her ankles hurt, and her head was still pounding, and she was very, very aware that the next 3 minutes were going to determine everything. Reyes reached the rear exit door. He put his hand on the push bar, and then the lights went out. Not gradually, all at once, total, the kind of darkness that a building produces when its power is cut from an external source by people who know exactly which line to sever. Ava heard the collective sharp intake of breath around her, heard Vargas curse in Spanish, heard one of the wall guards knock something over reaching for a weapon. She felt Vargas's grip on her arm tighten reflexively. She felt him turn toward her in the dark, the instinct of a man securing his asset before anything else. She counted to 2, because she knew what came after the lights. The east wall of the warehouse did not open so much as cease to exist. The breach charge was a flat thud. Not the explosion of movies, but the compressed, focused violence of shaped charges applied by people who have spent years learning the precise amount of force required to take a door off its frame without collapsing the structure around it. And then there was light, sudden and white and tactical. And there were voices, clear and commanding. And there were 20 men moving with the specific, organized velocity of a force that has rehearsed this exact configuration until the rehearsal and the execution are the same thing. "Federal agents, get down, get down, get down." The room became noise and motion and the specific geometry of a tactical breach in a confined space, which is controlled chaos of a very particular kind. Controlled on one side, chaotic on the other. Reyes's men had weapons, and they had the instinct to use them, and they had nowhere to run. And those 3 things in combination produced a situation that was dangerous and loud and moved very fast. Vargas yanked her hard. She let herself be yanked, 1 step, 2 steps, and then she used the direction of the yank against him, turned into it instead of away from it, dropped her weight onto her back foot, and drove her right elbow into the junction of his jaw and his neck with every pound she had, which was 138 pounds directed through approximately 2 square inches of bone at a target she could find in the dark because she had been mapping his position for the last 40 minutes. He went down. She stepped over him and hit the floor, flat, arms over her head, because the professional thing, the thing that kept you alive when 20 people with weapons were moving through a space at speed, was to be as small and as still and as horizontal as possible and let them sort it out. She heard Reyes. She heard his voice, sharp and high, somewhere to her left. Not the voice of the controlled, curious man who had crouched in front of her and asked her questions. This was a different voice. This was the voice underneath the composure, the one that had been there all along. Don't move, And then a SEAL voice, flat and absolute. Drop it right now. 1 second, 2 seconds. The sound of a weapon hitting concrete is specific. Not a clatter, a particular dense thud. The sound of something heavy and metal surrendering its purpose. Then nothing, or not nothing. The sounds of a secured space. Voices calling clear. The rustle of zip ties. The specific controlled quality of trained men accounting for every body in a room. A flashlight found her. She squinted into it, arms still over her head, and said, "Martinez, asset, friendly." Martinez? The voice was young, male, carrying the very slight elevation of someone whose adrenaline is doing what adrenaline does. "Ava Martinez," she said, DIA attached. "I'm the one who sent the signal." A pause. She heard him key a radio, heard Cole's voice come back, distant, tinny, unmistakable, confirming her. The flashlight lowered. A hand appeared. She took it and stood up, and the man behind the flashlight was maybe 25 years old, with eyes that were very steady and a grip that was careful without being gentle. The grip of someone who had been told she might be injured. "You all right?" he said. She took a full breath. She assessed. Head pressure mostly resolved. Ankles sore. Palms scraped from the concrete. Heart rate coming down from whatever it had peaked at in the last 30 seconds. Nothing broken. Nothing that wouldn't answer to ice in 48 hours. "I'm all right," she said. "There's a room in the back," he said. "We've got someone." "I know," she said. "I know." She moved toward the door at the back of the warehouse, the door to the room within the room. Another SEAL was already working on the lock. Not the door itself, but the external bolt that had been added. The kind of bolt that said this room was not meant to be opened from the inside. He had it off in under 10 seconds. The door opened. The man inside was on the floor, back against the wall, wrists bound in front of him, his face carrying 3 weeks of what a face carries when it has been kept in a small room with very little light and very little food and considerable amounts of fear that it has refused to show to the people responsible for putting it there. His eyes came up when the door opened, sharp, wary, the eyes of someone who has trained themselves not to hope too easily. He saw the tactical gear. He saw the badge on the chest plate. He exhaled like a man setting down something he had been carrying for a very long time. "Agent Reyes," said the SEAL in the doorway. Daniel Reyes, DEA, looked up. His voice came out cracked and dry and entirely steady. "Took you long enough," he said. Ava stood behind the SEAL and felt something move through her chest that she could not fully name. Not relief exactly, because relief was too simple for what this was. It was the specific feeling of a thing completed, of a weight that had been distributed across months in decisions, and early mornings in parking structures, and conversations in stairwells, suddenly arriving at the place it had always been moving toward. She became aware then of a sound she had not noticed until it stopped. A sound that had been underneath everything, the background frequency of her own vigilance, the constant low hum of a person who has been operating at the edge of themselves for a very long time. It stopped in that moment, the way a machine stops when its job is finally done. From deeper in the warehouse, she heard Cole's voice. Real this time, not over a radio. He had come in with the team, or behind it, and she could hear him issuing instructions, coordinating, doing the work of the aftermath in the specific, efficient way of a man who had been waiting to do this work and was relieved to finally be doing it. She turned away from the open door and leaned against the wall beside it. She closed her eyes. She let herself have 10 seconds, exactly 10, she counted them, of not holding anything together, of just being a person who had been through something and needed 10 seconds to acknowledge that privately. Then she opened her eyes. Across the warehouse floor, surrounded by 3 Navy SEALs and wearing zip ties on his wrists, Ernesto Reyes sat on the concrete. He was looking at her. His face was composed. The composure had come back, the controlled, watchful quality that was as natural to him as breathing. But his eyes held something she had not seen in them before. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has badly miscalculated. She held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not say anything. She simply looked at him for 3 seconds, long enough to let him understand that she had known, from the moment the van door closed, exactly how this ended. Then she looked away. Cole appeared at her shoulder. Ava. I need to sit down, she said, just for a minute. Take the time, he said. She sat down on a folding chair that someone had righted in the chaos, and she pressed her palms flat on her thighs, and she breathed. 4 counts in, 6 counts out, and she let the room do what it was going to do around her. 14 SEALs securing a warehouse, 1 DEA agent being helped to his feet by 2 of them, his legs uncertain after 3 weeks of limited movement, but his back straight, deliberately and stubbornly straight. The back of a man who has decided that the people who put him on that floor will not see him carried out of it. 4 of Reyes's men in restraints. Vargas regaining consciousness on the concrete with a specific dazed expression of someone who has been hit correctly and knows it. And Garrett Cole standing 2 feet away from her, looking at her with an expression that was not quite professional and not quite personal, but was completely, entirely honest. I want to say something, he said. Don't, she said. Ava. Cole, she looked at him. Buy me coffee, tomorrow, somewhere that isn't a federal building, and we can talk about whatever you want to say. She paused. But right now, I just want to breathe. He nodded. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Not a gesture of comfort exactly, more the gesture of one person acknowledging another person's realness, their presence, the fact of them. And then he moved away to do the work that needed doing. She breathed. She counted her heartbeats. 112. Coming down. Outside, somewhere on that dead-end industrial street, she knew there were more vehicles and more agents, and the beginning of the long, complicated machinery of prosecution and documentation and federal proceedings that would take the next 2 years to complete. She knew there would be debriefs and reports and conversations she was not looking forward to. She knew there would be questions about every decision she had made from the moment she parked 2 blocks away to the moment she sent the signal with her phone against the concrete. She also knew, in the particular quiet of that folding chair, that she did not regret a single one of them. Her ankles hurt. Her head was still tight. Her palms were scraped raw. She was completely, irreducibly intact. The folding chair was not comfortable. That was the detail Ava would remember most clearly about the next 40 minutes. Not the debriefs, not the noise, not the specific controlled chaos of a federal operation shifting from its action phase to its documentation phase, but the particular discomfort of that chair, the way the metal edge pressed into the back of her thighs, and how she sat in it anyway because standing required a decision, and she was temporarily out of those. Cole came back to her at 9:14. She knew the time because someone had handed her a watch. Standard issue, the kind the task force used to keep field personnel synchronized. And she had strapped it on her left wrist with the automatic practicality of someone who understands that knowing the time is always better than not knowing it. "The debrief team is 20 minutes out," he said. He handed her a bottle of water and a protein bar that had the specific texture of something made entirely of obligation. She opened the water and drank half of it before she responded. "Reyes is secured? En route to federal holding. He hasn't said a word since they cuffed him." "He won't," she said. "Not tonight. He's calculating." "Let him calculate," Cole said. "We have 14 witnesses, a warehouse full of physical evidence, and a federal agent who spent 3 weeks in that back room and has a very clear recollection of every conversation he was present for." He paused. "He's done." She believed him. She also knew that done in the federal prosecution sense and done in the practical, immediate, personal sense were two different things, separated by years of legal proceedings and appeals and the slow grind of institutional justice. But she held that thought quietly and said nothing, because this was not the moment for it. "Daniel Reyes," she said. "Where is he?" "Paramedics are with him. He's dehydrated, some soft tissue damage to his wrists, nothing that won't heal. He's already asking for a phone." "Of course he is. He wants to call his wife." Something moved through her chest at that, quiet and clean and almost unbearably human. A man who had been in a room for 3 weeks, who had been through whatever he had been through in that room, and the first thing he wanted was to hear his wife's voice. She thought about that for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Let him call," she said. "Already done," Cole said. He sat down in a chair beside her, another folding chair, equally uncomfortable, and he sat in it with the same resigned endurance she was applying to hers. For a moment, they were just two people sitting in folding chairs in a warehouse that smelled like concrete and adrenaline, and neither of them said anything. And the silence was not awkward. It was the silence of two people who have been through the same thing from different angles and don't need to perform anything for each other. "The leak," Ava said. Cole exhaled slowly. "We're working on it." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now that's factually accurate." She turned her head and looked at him directly. "Cole, someone inside your task force told Reyes there was a female source in the hospital. That person almost got me killed tonight, and they definitely got Daniel Reyes held for 3 weeks in a room." She paused. "I want to know who it is." "So do I," he said, and his voice was very quiet and very flat, and she understood that his flatness was covering something. Not incompetence, not indifference, but a specific kind of fury that a certain kind of careful person keeps extremely compressed. The kind that only becomes visible when you're sitting close enough to feel its heat. "You have a suspect," she said. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. "Cole." "I have a direction," he said carefully. "Not a name yet, and I need you to not push on this tonight, because if I tell you a direction and you pull on that thread before we've had a chance to build the case around it, we lose the prosecution and the person walks." She sat with that. She understood the logic. She did not like it, which was separate from understanding it. "1 week," she said. "What?" "I'm giving you 1 week before I start asking again. And when I ask again, I want a name, not a direction." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not actually in a position to give me timelines, Martinez." "I know," she said, "but I'm giving you one anyway." He almost smiled. Almost. 1 week, he said. The debrief team arrived at 9:37. 3 people, 2 she didn't know, 1 she did. A DIA analyst named Priya Sandhu, who had been on the peripheral support team for the Mercy General operation, and who was, Ava had always thought, considerably sharper than anyone around her gave her credit for. Priya came in carrying a tablet and a recorder and a cup of coffee that she handed directly to Ava before sitting down, which immediately elevated her status in Ava's estimation from considerable to absolute. "How are you physically?" Priya asked. "Functional. Can you be more specific?" "Ankles are sore, minor abrasion on both palms, some residual pressure headache from the inversion. Nothing that requires medical attention that I can't provide myself." Priya made a note. "You were inverted for approximately how long?" "Approximately 10 minutes, maybe 11. "And your cognitive function throughout? Any gaps, any moments of significant impairment?" "No," Ava said. "I was tracking continuously." Priya nodded. She set the tablet down and looked at Ava with an expression that was professional, but not cold. The expression of someone who is doing their job and is also a person doing their job simultaneously. "We're going to record this. Standard debrief protocol. You know how it works." "I know how it works," Ava said. "Then let's start from the moment you left the staging location." She talked for 41 minutes. She was precise, chronological, and comprehensive, the way she was always precise and chronological and comprehensive when giving a report, because the habit of accuracy was so deeply installed in her that it operated independent of context. She gave her debrief the way she gave a nursing shift report, because both were a matter of getting the facts right so the next person could make good decisions. She told them about the parking location, the approach, the 40 feet to the personnel door. She told them about the van and the grab and the specific sequence of the ride, the turns she had counted, the time she had tracked, the moment she understood she was not going to a secondary location, but directly to Reyes, which meant Reyes had been watching the warehouse perimeter and had seen her approach, which meant his operational security was better than the task force's surveillance had accounted for. She told them about the interrogation, about the photograph on Vargas's phone, 2 weeks old, her crouching at the drain, which meant the surveillance of the corridor had begun before Cole had flagged the leak, which meant Reyes had known about her or suspected her longer than any of them had realized. She told them about the signal, the secondary phone on her forearm, the 2-vibration confirmation, the way she had used the stumble to create the angle she needed. Priya was writing continuously. One of the two unfamiliar debriefers, a man with glasses in the specific dry precision of a federal attorney, leaned forward at the part about the forearm phone. "That was not in your equipment manifest," he said. "No," she agreed. "You added it independently?" "I added it at the staging location," she said. "Cole was coordinating the authorization. Nobody was looking at my arms." She paused. "The comm unit I was issued used the same frequency band as the primary task force channel. Given that Reyes's people had jammed that channel at the hospital earlier in the day, I assessed that using the same unit in proximity to the warehouse was a liability. The secondary phone was a contingency." The man with glasses looked at Cole. Cole said nothing, which was a form of endorsement. "Unorthodox," the attorney said. "Effective," Ava said. Priya made a note. The debrief concluded at 10:58. Ava knew this because she checked the watch. The warehouse had taken on the particular quality of a space that has been the center of everything and is now becoming just a space again. The tactical lights were supplemented by work lights someone had brought in. The SEALs had transitioned to a security perimeter outside, and the remaining people inside were moving through the methodical work of evidence documentation. Someone had set up a folding table with coffee and sandwiches in an act of institutional optimism that Ava found genuinely touching. She stood up from the folding chair for the first time in over an hour. Her ankles protested. She walked on them anyway, because walking on things that hurt is frequently the fastest way to determine whether they are worth worrying about, and these were not. She poured herself a coffee, black, because there was no milk, and she was not going to ask for any. And she stood to one side of the table and drank it and let herself look at the room the way you look at something that you have been inside of and are now outside of and can finally see the shape of. The door at the back of the warehouse, the room within the room, was standing open. The overhead light inside was on. She could see the marks on the floor where Daniel Reyes had been sitting. The faint, worn path where a man walks the same short distance back and forth, because it is the only distance available. She looked at it for a moment and then looked away, because some things you acknowledge and then you let be. She was on her second coffee when Marcus Webb walked in. She saw him before he saw her, which gave her approximately 4 seconds to process the fact of him. The way he moved, that particular Atlanta unhurriedness that he carried even now, even here, even in a federal evidence scene, at 11 o'clock at night wearing street clothes with a DIA escort at his shoulder. He was looking around the warehouse with the expression of someone who has been told a version of events and is now attempting to reconcile it with the physical reality in front of him. Then he saw her. He stopped walking. He looked at her, not at her badge, not at the scrubs she was still wearing, not at the scrapes on her palms, but at her face, specifically her face, the way he had always looked at her face, with the particular attentive quality that had always made her careful around him. He walked over. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything, and she let him look, because she had been managing his perception of her for 6 months, and she was abruptly, completely done with that. "So," he said. "So," she said. "The supply runs," he said. "The 3-floor corridor, the way you run a code." He paused. "Your dad was a firefighter." "He was," she said. "That part was true." He exhaled through his nose, not angry, not hurt, something more complex than either. The sound of a person recalibrating a significant amount of information simultaneously. "How much of it was real?" "More than you'd think," she said. "The nursing is real. Everything I did on 4B, that was real." She paused. "The part that wasn't real was why I was there." "The why matters," he said. "I know it does." He looked at the room around them. He looked at the open door at the back. He looked at the folding chair she'd been sitting in, the water bottle, the protein bar wrapper. He was doing the math. She could see him doing it, the specific arithmetic of everything he thought he'd known against everything he was now being handed. "Imani's yellow food phase," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What? Was that? I mean, that's real, right? My daughter actually only eats yellow food. You didn't?" He stopped. He almost laughed, except it came out slightly wrong, too close to something else. "Marcus," she said, "I was never gathering intelligence on you. Your daughter eats yellow food and you love her completely, and that is the most real thing in this building." He was quiet for a moment. Then he did laugh, properly this time, the real version, the compressed, dark, funny way that nurses laugh. And she laughed too. And it was possibly the strangest laugh she had ever had, standing in a federal evidence scene at 11 p.m. with dried blood on her palms. But it was also completely, entirely genuine. "They came to the unit," he said, sobering. "2 guys. After you disappeared off the floor, Dana was asking where you went. And then these federal agents showed up and said everyone needed to go to the conference room, and I thought..." He stopped. "I thought something had happened to you." "Something did happen to me," she said. "I can see that." His eyes moved to her ankles, where the rope marks were visible above her sneakers, red, darkening toward bruise at the edges. He looked at them with the specific, focused attention of a nurse who is doing an involuntary assessment. "You need ice on those." "I know. And you should probably have someone look at your head pressure. Inversion for any significant..." "Marcus." "What?" "I'm okay," she said. "I assessed myself." "You're a terrible patient," he said. "I know that too," she said. He looked at her for another moment, the long, searching look of someone who is deciding something. Then he said quietly, "Were you ever going to tell me?" And there it was, the question underneath all the other questions, the real one. She had known it was coming from the moment he walked in the door, and she had not prepared an answer for it, because some questions don't respond to preparation. No, she said. I wasn't. Not because of you, because I couldn't. That's not a comfort, I know. It's not, he agreed. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it, the complete, uncomplicated version of it, with nothing managed around it. The people on 4B, Dana, you, all of them, you deserved better than what I was able to give you. He was quiet for a long time. The warehouse worked around them. Voices, movement, the documentation of an operation's end. Finally, he said, Gloria's husband, the AFib, did you actually think it was benign? She almost smiled. I thought it was worth watching, she said. I told you that. You told me that, he confirmed. He looked at the floor. Yeah, he nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who has landed somewhere he didn't expect to be and is deciding to stand there anyway. Okay. Okay, she said. I don't know what else to call it, he said. It's a lot to process. I'm going to be processing it for a while. He looked up at her. But you're all right. That's the part that matters right now. She held his gaze. Yeah, she said. That's the part that matters. Cole appeared at her shoulder with the timing of a man who had been waiting at a respectful distance. He looked at Marcus, then at her, then said simply, We need to move you to a secure location tonight. Until we have the full sweep completed on the hospital and confirm no secondary assets. Secondary assets, Marcus repeated, his voice going flat. Standard protocol, Cole said. We don't believe there's a remaining threat, but you don't know, Marcus said. We will by morning, Cole said. Miss Martinez will be in a secured location. You and the rest of the 4B staff have been cleared, but we'd like everyone to stay available for the next 24 hours. Marcus looked at Ava. She gave him a small nod. The nod of a person who is telling you that this part is real and the person telling it to you is reliable. All right, Marcus said. He looked at her once more. Ice, he said, on your ankles. First thing I'll do, she said. He nodded and let the escort take him back toward the entrance. She watched him go, his particular unhurried walk, the photograph of Imani still clipped to his badge, visible from across the room. She thought about the yellow food phase and the arithmetic of recalibration, and the specific, irreplaceable quality of people who, when handed information that restructures everything, choose to land somewhere steady. She turned to Cole. The secondary sweep, it's already running, he said. We have 3 agents back at the hospital working with hospital security. We identified 6 points of potential cartel access. The corridor, the loading dock, 2 of the patient rooms, the pharmacy subcontract, and the waste contractor. All 6 are being shut down simultaneously. The waste contractor has a name, she said. He does. He's having a very bad night. She thought about the months she had spent in that hospital, the layers of it, the way the cartel's operation had existed underneath the hospital's ordinary life, like a second circulatory system, invisible, functional, pumping something entirely different than what the surface suggested. She thought about how many people had walked past it every day without knowing. Dana with her 20 years of sharp attention, the residents who argued about potassium levels, the housekeeping staff who cleaned the corridor twice a day and had no reason to look at the drain covers. All of them living one life while another life operated an inch below their feet. Cole, she said. Yeah. The operation at the hospital, the corridor route, the financial pipeline. It's been running for 18 months. Reyes is arrested, but the infrastructure that made it possible is still there. The contractors, the access points, We know, he said. That's the next 6 months of work. Reyes is the head. The body is still moving. She understood that. She also understood, with a particular clarity that comes from having been inside something rather than watching it from the outside, that the body of something like this was more durable than the head, and that 6 months was an optimistic estimate. What happens to me, she said. Cole looked at her with the slight surprise of someone who has been so focused on the operational aftermath that the personal question catches them genuinely off guard. What do you mean? My cover is burned. The hospital assignment is over. What happens next? He was quiet for a moment. That's a conversation for a debrief at a later date. When you've had Cole, she said it the same way she'd said it in the staging location. The version of his name that meant she was done with everything around the actual answer. What happens next? He met her eyes. That depends on what you want, he said, and his voice was careful and direct in equal measure. You have options. You can step back from field operations permanently. Your record warrants it, and the recommendation would be supported from the top. You can take a desk position with a task force in an advisory capacity, or, he paused. Or, she said, there's another assignment, different location, different operation, same general structure. It came through 2 days ago. Garrett, the director, he flagged it for you before tonight, before any of this. She stared at him. 2 days ago. 2 days ago, he confirmed, while I was still at the hospital. Yes. While Reyes was already moving. The two things aren't Cole, the quiet version, the flat version, while the man who was about to send 2 people to my unit was already in motion. Someone in a federal building somewhere was reading my file and deciding they wanted to use me again. That's one way to characterize it, he said. Is there another way? He considered for a moment. They read your file and decided you were the best option, which is different from characterizing you as a resource to be deployed and not a person to be protected. Those two things can coexist. She thought about that. She thought about Daniel Reyes calling his wife from a paramedic unit in a parking lot. She thought about Marcus Webb and the yellow food and the way he had said, "You're all right, that's the part that matters." She thought about Dana Kowalski with her 20 years of sharp attention and the way she had laughed at the nurse's station the morning Ava had already known everything was ending. She thought about the folding chair, the protein bar made of obligation, the specific weight of sitting still in the middle of someone else's operation and waiting for your body to stop shaking. What's the location? She said. Cole looked at her carefully. Miami. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the watch on her wrist. 11:22 p.m. 9 hours ago, she had been standing at a medication cart on Ward 4B, arguing about a potassium order. 7 hours ago, she had been upside down in this building with a man's hands on her face. She was tired. She was specifically, comprehensively tired in the way that isn't fixed by sleep, the kind of tired that is really a question about what you're going to keep spending yourself on and whether the cost makes sense. And she knew, in the part of herself that had always known things before she was willing to name them, what her answer was going to be. Not tonight. Tonight she would not give it. But she knew. Secure location first, she said. Of course, Cole said. And ice, she said. I told someone I'd do that first. He nodded. He handed her a fresh bottle of water without being asked. She took it and drank and looked at the open door at the back of the warehouse one more time. The worn floor, the overhead light, the marks of 3 weeks of a man refusing to break. And she held that image for exactly as long as it took to understand what it meant to her. And then she turned away from it. She walked toward the exit with Cole at her shoulder, and she did not look back. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled like the ocean, the way San Diego nights always did regardless of what had happened in them, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about this city. Its complete indifference to human events, its willingness to go on being itself while everything else changed around it. She stood in it for a moment, just stood, feeling the temperature on her face. A black SUV was waiting 10 feet away. A different driver, not Hendricks, someone younger. Cole put his hand on the door. Ava, he said. She looked at him. What you did tonight, he said, with the signal, the floor, the timing. He stopped. He was not a man who reached easily for words when the situation was personal rather than operational, and she could see him working for them with the slightly uncomfortable effort of someone doing a thing they're not practiced at. It was exceptional, he said finally. You were exceptional. She looked at him for a moment. Tell me that again in Miami, she said, when you're asking me to do it again. He almost smiled. She got in the car. The door closed. The driver pulled out. The warehouse receded in the side mirror. Work lights in federal vehicles, and the ordinary institutional aftermath of something that had been extraordinary for about 40 minutes and was now becoming paperwork. She leaned her head back against the headrest. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she let herself be still, genuinely still, without calculation underneath it, without anything being tracked or managed or held. Just still. Her ankles ached. Her palms stung. Her head was finally clear. She was 31 years old, and she had just survived a night that had no business being survived. And outside the window, the city of San Diego was doing what it always did, moving through its own life with complete indifference. And she was part of it, moving through hers. For now, that was enough. The safe house was a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of an unremarkable apartment building in Chula Vista, 7 miles from the warehouse and approximately 9 miles from Mercy General Hospital, which was a distance that felt both too close and completely insufficient. Ava arrived at 12:41 a.m. The young driver helped her with nothing because she did not need help, which he seemed to understand, and he left her at the door with a key card and a number to call and the specific, discreet professionalism of someone trained to be present without being intrusive. She stood inside the door for a moment after it closed. The apartment was clean, neutral, furnished with the careful impersonality of a space that has housed many people and remembers none of them. She noticed these things the way she noticed everything, automatically, cataloging without meaning to. And then she set the cataloging aside and walked to the kitchen and opened the freezer and found, because someone with operational foresight had thought to stock it, a bag of frozen peas. She sat on the floor with her back against the kitchen cabinets and pressed the frozen peas against her left ankle and then her right ankle, rotating every 4 minutes, and she stayed there on the kitchen floor for a long time without moving, because the floor was solid and the cold was real, and sometimes after a night that has contained too many things, the most useful thing a person can do is sit on the floor and let themselves be exactly where they are. She thought about her mother. She thought about the phone call she would not be making tonight, because there was no version of tonight that could be compressed into a phone call at 1 a.m. without causing the kind of alarm that would require a second, longer phone call to undo. Her mother knew she worked in a hospital. Her mother believed she was competent and dedicated and occasionally a little too quiet for someone her age. Her mother sent her articles about meal prep and asked about her social life with the gentle persistence of a woman who understood that she could not ask the real questions and had learned to love her daughter in the space around them. Ava pressed the frozen peas harder against her ankle and breathed. At 2:17 a.m., her phone rang. Not the secondary phone. That one was in federal evidence custody, along with the tape that had held it to her forearm. Her personal phone, which Cole's team had retrieved from her car and left on the kitchen counter with the careful, slightly apologetic efficiency of people who had been through her belongings and knew it. The number was Marcus Webb. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. "You're supposed to be sleeping," she said. "So are you," he said. "You're not sleeping." "I'm icing my ankles." "Good." A pause. "I'm at a hotel. They put us all in a hotel. Dana is 3 rooms down, and I can hear her on the phone through the wall. She is extremely unhappy about the situation." "Dana's always unhappy about situations she didn't create," Ava said. "It doesn't mean she can't handle them." "No," he agreed. "It definitely does not mean that." Another pause, longer this time. "How are you actually?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, because it was a genuine question from a person who was capable of receiving a genuine answer. And she was done, at least for tonight, with managed responses. Tired, she said. Specifically tired in a way that isn't about sleep. The kind where you've been holding something together for a long time, and then you don't have to anymore, and you realize how much weight it was. Yeah, he said quietly, I know that kind. Imani, she said, have you talked to her? I called when they put me in the room. She was already asleep. A brief pause in which she could hear something real. My mom answered, I needed to hear someone's voice who didn't know any of this was happening, you know? I know, she said. She told me Imani had eaten a banana and corn at dinner and declared it the best meal of her life. Ava smiled. It came up entirely on its own. The smile. No management involved, no calculation, just the pure, involuntary response of a person hearing something that is genuinely good in the middle of a night that has contained a great deal that was not. That child is consistent, she said. She really is, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice and the exhaustion underneath it, and the specific warmth of a man who loves his daughter with a completeness that nothing, not hotels at 1 a.m., not federal operations, not yellow food phases, can interrupt. They stayed on the line for another 11 minutes without talking about anything important, which was its own kind of important. He talked about a difficult patient he'd had earlier in the week, before all of this. She told him about Gloria's husband, whose AFib had resolved on day 4, and who had gone home holding his wife's hand. He said that was good. She said it was. At 2:31, he said she should try to sleep, and she said he should too, and neither of them said anything about whether they would talk again after tonight, because that was a question that belonged to a different time, and both of them understood that. She slept 3 hours. Not enough and enough simultaneously, the specific paradox of sleep after high-stress events. The body takes what it needs and no more, and what it needs is not always what you'd choose. She was awake at 5:42, which was almost exactly when she would have been awake for a 6 a.m. shift. Her body's internal schedule so thoroughly calibrated to Ward 4B that it didn't know to stop. She lay still for a moment. She thought about Ward 4B. She thought about the 6 a.m. light through the window of the break room, the particular quality of it before the marine layer burned off. She thought about the medication cart and the badge scanner and the specific institutional smell of a hospital at the beginning of a shift, which she had always found strangely comforting. The smell of a place where people came to be helped and where the helping was mostly possible. She thought about not going back to it. The loss of it was not the cover. The cover was a professional concern, clean and solvable. The loss of it was the unit itself. Dana's 20 years of sharp attention, the patients who had been real, and whose fear had been real, and whose names she still knew, every single one of them. The specific texture of work that mattered in a direct, visible, immediate way. Work where the outcome was a person who was either better or worse than when you started, and you were one of the reasons why. She had not expected to miss it before she lost it. She had not expected it to be that real. She got up. She made coffee with what was in the kitchen. She stood at the window with the cup and watched the city move into morning. And she made herself sit with the loss of 4B the way she had learned to sit with other things. Not away from it, not past it, but directly in it, until it became something she carried rather than something that stopped her. Cole arrived at 8 a.m. exactly, which was characteristic. He was carrying 2 cups from a coffee place down the street. Not the institutional coffee she'd found in the kitchen, actual coffee, which she took from him without ceremony and immediately assessed as significantly better than what she'd had. Dana Kowalski is requesting a full briefing, he said, sitting down across from her at the kitchen table. Of course she is, Ava said. She sent 3 emails to the task force's general inquiry address last night, between midnight and 2 a.m. What did they say? The first one asked who had authorized a federal operation in her hospital without informing hospital administration. The second one asked specifically about the patient in bed 12, Jorge Medina, and whether his 11 visitors constituted a safety concern for her staff retroactively. The third one asked for the name of whoever was responsible so she could have a direct conversation with them. Cole paused. She capitalized direct conversation. Ava drank her coffee. She deserves answers, she said. She'll get them, Cole said, through the appropriate channels, appropriately sanitized. Cole, what? Dana Kowalski spent 20 years caring for people who were frightened and vulnerable in her unit, including, for 6 months, a federal intelligence asset who was using her unit as an operational platform without her knowledge or consent. She deserves real answers, not sanitized ones. Cole was quiet for a moment. What I can give her is a version that's real enough to close the loop without compromising active elements of the case, he said. That's the best I can do. She held his gaze. Then make sure that version includes that her staff was never the target, that nobody on 4B was in danger because of what Ava Martinez was doing there. Because that's the thing Dana is actually asking underneath all the emails. Cole nodded. That I can say clearly. She put the cup down. The leak, she said. 1 week, you said. He met her eyes. I know what I said. I'm not pushing tonight. I'm just noting that the clock is running. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read. Not evasion, something more complex. The look of a man holding information that has weight to it. There are things in motion, he said carefully. I need you to trust the process for a few more days. You're asking a woman who was hanging upside down 11 hours ago to trust the process, she said. I am, he said, because the alternative is that I give you a direction, you pull on it, and we lose the prosecution on a chain of evidence problem, and the person responsible for Daniel Reyes spending 3 weeks in that room walks out of a federal building with a lawyer. She sat with that. It was the same argument he had made the night before, and it was still correct, which was its own specific frustration. Fine, she said, but I want to be in the room when you have the name. That, Cole said carefully, I can work with. He left at 9:15. She was alone in the apartment for an hour, which she spent doing the things that needed doing in the aftermath of a night like this. Not dramatic things, ordinary things. She filed a brief summary of her physical status through the secure app on her personal phone, because the DIA medical protocol required it, and she complied with protocols even when she was the only person who would have known if she didn't. She ate something from the refrigerator. She called her mother, not to say anything specific, just to call, and she listened to her mother talk for 22 minutes about a neighbor's garden and a recipe she'd tried and a television show she was watching. And she contributed warmly and listened carefully and felt, through all of it, the specific, complicated love of a person who is holding a version of themselves back from someone they love completely, because the full version would be too much to ask that person to carry. At 11:30, Cole sent a car, not to the safe house, to Mercy General Hospital. She had not asked for this. She had not expected it. The text simply said, "You have 30 minutes if you want them." She read it twice. She got in the car. The hospital looked exactly like itself. That was the first thing she thought when the car pulled into the parking structure and she stepped out. That nothing about the outside of it had changed. That it was entirely possible to look at this building and have no idea what had happened underneath it for 18 months. The loading dock, the corridors, the drain cover on the 3rd floor, all of it still there, still looking like a hospital, because that was what it was, underneath everything else, and what it would keep being. She used her badge at the main entrance. It still worked, which surprised her until she realized that deactivating it would have triggered a security flag, and someone with operational sense had decided to leave it active until this morning. The lobby was doing what hospital lobbies do at mid-morning. Volunteers at the information desk, someone being wheeled out in a discharge chair, the particular mixture of arrivals and departures that defines a place where life is constantly being negotiated. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. Ward 4B was 20 feet from the elevator bank. She could hear it before she reached it. The sounds she knew, monitor tones, the specific percussion of a nurse's station in mid-morning, someone's call light, the abbreviated urgency of clinical voices moving through decisions. She stood at the entrance for a moment without going in. Dana Kowalski saw her immediately. Dana always saw everything immediately. That was the 20-year thing, the specific peripheral vision that cardiac step-down installs in a person like a second nervous system. She was at the nurse's station with a tablet in her hand, and she looked up, and the look on her face when she saw Ava was not the look Ava had prepared for. It was not anger, though anger would have been reasonable. It was not the professional blankness of someone managing their response in a workplace. It was something more complicated, relief and anger, and something underneath both of them that was closer to hurt. The specific hurt of someone who had trusted a version of a person and discovered the version was incomplete. She handed the tablet to the unit secretary without looking at it and walked toward Ava and stopped 2 feet away. "You look terrible," Dana said. "I know," Ava said. "You're not scheduled." She said it the way she said everything clinical, as a fact, not a judgment, but with the weight of long attention behind it. "I know that too." Dana looked at her for a long moment. "Come in," she said, and walked toward the break room. Ava followed. The break room was empty, which meant it was between the rhythms. The morning rush done, the noon push not yet started. Dana poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine and handed one to Ava and leaned against the counter and crossed her arms, not defensively but in the particular way of a woman who is about to have a real conversation and wants to be solidly positioned for it. "How much can you tell me?" Dana said. "Enough to answer what you're actually asking," Ava said, "which is whether your people were in danger." They weren't. Nothing that happened in this hospital was directed at the staff or the patients. The operation that was running here, through the corridor, through the contractor access, it was using the building, not the people in it. Dana absorbed this. "Bed 12, she said. Jorge Medina." "He was a relay point," Ava said, "passing information through visitors. He himself wasn't dangerous." "His 11 visitors," Dana said flatly, "were not interested in anyone on this unit," Ava said. "I want to be clear about that." Dana was quiet for a moment. Her coffee cup was in her hand and she was looking at it, and Ava recognized this. The look of someone processing a significant recalibration while appearing to look at something neutral. She had done the same thing many times. 6 months, Dana said. "Yes. I trained you on this unit." A pause. "I thought you were good." "I am good," Ava said quietly. "Both things are true." Dana looked up at her. "Both things," she repeated. "The nursing was real," Ava said. "Everything I did in that capacity, every patient, every shift, every decision, that was real. The training is real. The license is real. The caring was real." She paused. "The reason I was here was not what I told HR, but what I did while I was here, that was not a performance." Dana held her gaze for a long time. This was the thing about Dana Kowalski. She had 20 years of reading people who were frightened and in pain and sometimes not telling the truth about how bad things were. And she had developed, over those 20 years, an absolute precision in distinguishing genuine from performed. She was applying it now, and Ava let her, because she had nothing to manage anymore and nothing to hide, and the truth was the simplest thing she had to offer. "Gloria's husband," Dana said finally. "Day 4, Ava said. "The AFib resolved. He went home holding her hand." Dana exhaled. Not a sigh, something cleaner. The exhale of a woman who has been holding a question and has now received a real answer to it. "I know," she said. "I discharged him myself." They stood in the break room in the particular quiet of 2 people who have said the difficult things and are now in the space after them. Ava drank her coffee. Dana drank hers. "What happens now?" Dana said. "For the hospital, there will be a full security review. The access points that were being used have already been shut down. You'll probably see some changes to contractor protocols and the loading dock procedures in the next few weeks. She paused. For me, I'm being reassigned. Reassigned, Dana said. The word landed carefully, like a dish being set on a counter. Different city, Ava said. Different operation. You're doing it again, Dana said. Yes. Dana looked at her for a long moment. Are you good at it? She said. Not the nursing, she knew about the nursing. The other thing. The thing that had been running underneath for 6 months. Yes, Ava said. Good enough to come home? The question was simpler than it appeared and more complex than it sounded. Coming home was not a physical thing. Dana understood that. She meant something else. She meant, are you good enough at what you do to survive it? Are you the kind of person who makes it back? So far, Ava said. Dana nodded once. All right, she said. She pushed off from the counter and straightened up, the movement of a person who has finished what needed finishing and is returning to what needs doing. The store bought cookies on Tuesdays, she said. Were those strategic? Ava almost smiled. Those were just because I like baking. Dana looked at her for one more beat. Then she held out her hand. Not a hug, not an embrace, a handshake, deliberate and direct. The gesture of a woman who meets people as equals and always has. Ava took it. Be careful, Dana said. I will, Ava said. She left the break room. She walked back through Ward 4B, past the nurse's station, past the room she knew, bed 7, bed 9, bed 12, empty now and already assigned to someone new who would have no idea what had happened in it. She walked the length of the unit, the way she had walked it hundreds of times in 6 months, and she let herself feel it completely, the texture and weight of it, without looking away from any part. At the elevator, she stopped, turned around once, looked at the unit, the monitors, the station, the ordinary functional machinery of a place where people came to be helped, and she held it for exactly the time it took to understand what she was saying goodbye to. Then she got on the elevator. In the lobby, she stopped at the volunteer desk and asked the woman there to leave a message for the patient in room 411. An 82-year-old man named Robert Garland, admitted 2 days ago with heart failure, whose chart she had reviewed out of habit the week before, and whose wife had not yet come to visit because she was 3 states away and could not afford the flight. The message was brief. She had arranged with Cole, through the task force's victim support liaison, for a travel voucher. It was the kind of arrangement that required specific knowledge of how these things worked and the specific willingness to make 3 phone calls that nobody had asked her to make. The volunteer took the message without knowing what it meant and said she would deliver it, and Ava thanked her and walked out. Outside, the marine layer was still on the city, the particular gray-white of a San Diego morning that hadn't decided yet whether to become a San Diego afternoon. She stood in it for a moment. The car was waiting. She thought about Miami. She thought about the folder that was already being assembled somewhere in a federal building with her name on the tab, the new assignment, the new hospital, or the new institution, or whatever the new infrastructure was that would become the new ordinary life she would build around the new operation. She thought about the invisible she would have to put back on, the quiet, deliberate, cultivated invisibility, and whether she could do it again. And she knew the answer was yes, which was not a simple thing to know about yourself. She thought about Reyes. He was in federal holding, quiet, calculating, doing what people like him do when the external situation has collapsed, turning inward, building from whatever foundation remained. She thought about the case that would be built around him over the next 2 years, and she hoped, with the precise and unsentimental hope of someone who has seen how these things go, that it held. She thought about Daniel Reyes, whose wife's voice she had never heard, but whose relief she had seen on a man's face in the back of a warehouse in National City, and which had been entirely sufficient. She thought about Cole in the leak, and the 1 week she had given him. She thought about Priya Sandhu and the coffee she had handed over without being asked. She thought about Hendricks and his observation about 3 a.m. and how accurate it had been. She thought about Marcus Webb, who was at a hotel 3 miles away and would return to his 13-week contract on 4B and would continue to be a person who noticed things and loved his daughter and ate granola bars at 2 a.m. and laughed the right kind of laugh at the right kind of things. She thought about Imani, who had never once doubted that yellow food was the correct choice and had been thriving on that certainty, which was, Ava decided, either the best metaphor for something or just a child eating bananas. And both options were perfectly fine. She got in the car. The driver, the same young man from last night, pulled out of the lot and into the ordinary morning traffic of a city that did not know what had happened in it the night before. And Ava sat in the back seat and felt the particular quality of the moment between one thing and the next, the specific hinge point of a life that is always turning towards something without quite stopping to name it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Authorization confirmed for transfer. Miami briefing scheduled in 72 hours. She read it. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked out the window. 72 hours. Enough time to sleep properly, to ice her ankles until the bruising resolved, to call her mother and listen to 20 minutes of garden updates with the full attention her mother deserved. Enough time to sit in the specific stillness of not yet. Not yet deployed, not yet undercover, not yet invisible, and be simply herself, in the simple, full-weight meaning of that, for a small number of hours. She would take those hours. She had learned, in the specific hard school of 6 months of Mercy General, and everything it had cost, that the hours in between were not nothing, that the space between assignments was not waiting, that a person who does what she does is still, underneath all of it, a person, and that a person requires more than function, more than discipline, more than the ability to hold themselves together under pressure. A person requires the occasional frozen peas on the kitchen floor, the 2 a.m. phone call that is mostly just someone's voice, the 22 minutes of garden updates from a woman who does not know the full truth, but loves the full person. Ava Martinez knew all of this. She had always known it, in the part of herself that the training had not reached and never would. She carried it forward with her now, out of San Diego and toward whatever Miami was going to ask of her, with the same steadiness she had carried everything else. Not because she had no weight, but because she had learned exactly how to bear it. She was 31 years old. She had been a nurse and a ghost and a hostage, and the person who sent the signal that brought 20 men through a door. She had been invisible by design and seen by accident, and she had survived both. She looked forward through the windshield at the road ahead. She was already preparing for the next shift.